The sky broke open without warning. One moment Jack Rowe was riding through a dead, brittle stretch of land where the dust rose with every step of his horse. The next, thunder cracked so close it felt like the world had split in two. Rain came down hard and fast, slamming into him like thrown gravel, soaking his coat, his hat, his thoughts. His horse reared and snorted, hooves slipping in earth that only minutes ago had been powder dry. Jack leaned forward in the saddle, jaw tight, one hand steady on the reins. 3 miles. That was all that stood between him and his cabin. 3 miles of open land with no shelter, no trees worth trusting, and a storm that didn't care whether a man made it home or not. Texas didn't give warnings. It gave lessons. Lightning flashed again, bleaching the plains white for a heartbeat. Jack caught sight of water already running in shallow channels, carving the land open. This rain wasn't gentle. This was the kind that drowned cattle, washed out wagons, buried mistakes. Then he heard it. Laughter. Not the harsh bark of a drunk or the nervous sound of someone near panic. This was bright, unrestrained, completely out of place against the violence of the storm. Jack pulled his horse to a halt. Hell, he muttered, scanning the gray curtain of rain. Another flash of lightning revealed it. A wagon tilted at a dangerous angle, one wheel sunk deep in newly formed mud. A horse stood hitched nearby, eyes wide, muscles trembling. And beside the wagon a woman. She stood with her face turned up to the sky, rain plastering her dress to her frame, dark hair loose around her shoulders. Her arms were spread wide, palms open, as if she were catching the storm itself. She spun once, laughing again, a full-bodied sound that cut clean through the thunder. "Thank you," she called to the sky. "About time you showed up?" Jack stared, rain running down the brim of his hat, soaking into his collar. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen anyone react to trouble like that. Most folks cursed the weather, prayed against it, feared it. This woman welcomed it. She noticed him then. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew. "Well, hello there." She shouted over the roar of rain. "Ain't it something?" Jack didn't answer. His instincts screamed caution. A stranded wagon meant delay. Delay meant risk. And risk was something he'd learned to live without. She waded toward him anyway, boots sucking free from the mud with each step. "I was starting to think the sky had forgotten this land altogether," she said, eyes bright, rain dripping from her lashes. Guess it just needed encouragement. Up close, he could see she was young. Early 20s, maybe. Freckles scattered across her nose. Green eyes sharp and alive, like she noticed everything. "My wagon's stuck," she went on unnecessarily. "Wheels likely ruined." "I'm Clara Bell." She held out her hand. Jack looked at it. Then at the wagon. Then at the storm, still raging, turning the ground into a trap. "Jack Rowe," he said finally, not taking her hand. "Wheels broke. Not just stuck." Her smile dimmed a fraction. She nodded, accepting the truth without fuss. "Well," she said, glancing around, rain still pouring. "Then I'll need shelter." He hesitated. The word no sat ready on his tongue. He'd lived alone for years by choice. Solitude was safer, cleaner. People brought expectations, complications, memories. But the storm answered for him with another violent crack of thunder. "My place," he said. 3 miles west." Her relief was immediate. "That's mighty kind of you." "Ain't kindness," he replied, already dismounting. "Just sense." They worked together quickly, tying her horse to his, salvaging what supplies they could from the wagon. Clara never complained. Not once. Even as mud soaked her skirts and rain chilled her skin, she hummed under her breath. As if the storm had given her something she'd been missing. By the time they reached Jack's cabin, both were drenched through. The cabin was small, sturdy, built for function, and nothing else. One room. A stove. A table with 2 chairs. A narrow bed pushed against the wall. No pictures. No keepsakes. No evidence of a life beyond work and survival. Clara stood just inside the door, taking it in. "This is your home," she said, not judging. "Just stating." It serves, Jack replied. She smiled softly. Homes usually do more than that. He handed her a towel. Dry off. Stove works. Coffee in the tin. I'll sleep in the barn, he added, already turning away. She stopped him with her voice. Why don't you smile, Mr. Rowe? The question hit harder than the storm. He froze, hand on the doorframe, shoulders tense. No one asked him things like that. No one had the right. Nothing to smile about, he said. There's always something, she replied gently. Today, there's rain. He stepped out into the storm without answering. That night, Jack lay awake on the hay in his barn, listening to rain soak into land that had been begging for it. For the first time in years, his thoughts weren't on fences or feed or the careful math of survival. They circled around a woman who laughed at storms and asked questions no one else dared to ask. Inside the cabin, Clara sat by the stove, warming her hands, wondering what kind of man lived like he had nothing worth holding on to. And neither of them knew it yet, but the storm hadn't just broken the drought. It had started something neither would be able to walk away from. If that girl stayed one more day, Jack thought, staring into the dark, I wouldn't send her away. Morning came slow, the sullen gray sky and rain still dripping from the eaves like the world hadn't decided whether to quit the storm or not. Jack stood outside the cabin, arms crossed, boots sunk in soft mud. The land stretched wet and wide around him. It would take days to dry. His mare pawed the ground restlessly beside him, eager to be out of the weather. Jack wasn't much different. The silence of the storm's aftermath pressed in harder than the wind ever had. He hadn't slept much in the barn. Hay itched, cold clung to his bones, and worse than all that he'd spent half the night listening. Listening for movement inside the cabin. For footsteps. For her voice. Clara Bell. The woman who'd thanked the sky for rain and called it magnificent. Jack stepped onto the porch just as the cabin door creaked open. Clara stood framed in the doorway, barefoot, hair damp but braided now, wearing a clean dress green deep as pine. Her eyes were softer this morning, but still held that bright spark he couldn't name. Good morning, she said, like they were neighbors, meeting at a gate, not strangers thrown together by circumstance. Jack gave a curt nod. Storm-s easing. Seems so. She tilted her head, looking past him to the horizon. Still smells like rain. Inside, the warmth of the stove greeted him, first followed by the smell of something cooking. He stopped short. 2 plates sat on the table. Eggs steaming. Coffee in tin cups. The place looked different. Still plain, still small, but less empty. I hope you don't mind, Clara said, setting down the pan. I found eggs in your henhouse. Didn't figure the chickens would mind sharing. Jack blinked. You cooked. She smiled at him like it was the most natural thing in the world. You gave me a roof. Least I could do was give you breakfast. He sat, more from habit than ease. The chair creaked under him, the only sound for a moment besides the soft hiss of the stove. You planning on staying? He asked, voice rougher than he intended. Clara sipped her coffee. Only until someone can help me fix that wagon. I'm headed to my uncle's ranch, the Double B. You know it? Jack's jaw tightened. He knew it. Everyone within 100 miles knew it. Rufus Bell ran one of the biggest cattle spreads in the region. Hard man, proud, rich in land and ego. The kind of man who remembered slights and held grudges like family heirlooms. Yeah, Jack said. I know it. My uncle's expecting me. I was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. Her voice dropped slightly. Parents died last winter in St. Louis. Uncle Rufus offered me a place. I figured a fresh start. Jack stared down at his plate, untouched. Texas ain't kind to dreamers. Clara tilted her head. That's so? It's work, he said. Weather, wolves. Both the 4-legged and the 2-legged kind. Sounds like you've had run-ins with both. Jack didn't answer. She studied him, thoughtful. You speak like you're at war with this place. Not war. Respect, he replied. I know what it can do to folks who come unprepared. And you think I'm unprepared? The edge in her voice caught him off guard. She was Aussie soft. Not really. Whatever life she'd lived back east hadn't cushioned her too much. "I think laughing at the rain don't fix a broken wheel." "No," she agreed quietly, "but neither does cursing it." That stopped him. She met his gaze without flinching. "I've had my share of hardship, Mr. Rowe. I buried both parents and watched everything we owned get sold for pennies. I choose joy, not because I'm blind, but because I've seen what it looks like to live without it." The room held still after that. Not silence, he could still hear the rain dripping, the stove ticking, but a kind of stillness inside his chest he hadn't felt in years. Before he could say anything, hoofbeats broke the moment. Jack rose fast, instinct kicking in. His hand hovered near his belt, though no gun was there. Not now. Voices outside. Male, familiar. Clara stood too. "Who is it?" "Trouble," Jack muttered. He stepped onto the porch just as Eli Tucker dismounted from his horse, followed by 2 other riders from town. Eli, big-shouldered and kind-eyed, wore a rain-slick coat and a look that said this wasn't a social visit. "Jack," he called. "We came to check on folks. That storm cut some fences and scared half the town." Eli's eyes slid past Jack and landed on Clara as she stepped outside. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "Didn't expect to see anyone but this ornery cuss out here." "I'm Clara Bell," she said brightly. "My wagon broke yesterday, mister." Rowe was kind enough to offer shelter. Jack noticed the look that passed between Eli and the other men. Surprise, curiosity, and something colder. Something that made his stomach knot. "She's headed to the Double B," Jack said flatly. "Wagon S axle, S cracked. Won't make it far." Eli nodded slowly. "We'll take a look." "Your uncle's been asking about you in town, Miss Bell? Think he was fixing to send a search party?" "I'd be grateful," she said. As the men rode off toward the wagon, Clara turned to gather her things inside. Jack stood by, silent, watching her move like she belonged here already. She didn't take much. Just a small bag, a cloak, the last of the eggs tucked into a cloth. She turned to him at the door. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Rowe." He nodded. Words didn't come easy. Clara hesitated. "I hope our paths cross again." He didn't, he answer. She stepped close, just for a breath's width. "The territory's not as big as it looks," she said, almost a whisper. Then she was gone, walking into the wet gray world with her green dress brushing the doorway. Jack watched from the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded. By sunset, the cabin felt emptier than it ever had. He tried to ignore it. There were fences to mend, cattle to check, work enough to drown the hollowness. But come evening, he sat at the table, staring at the empty seat across from him. He didn't miss the laughter. He missed what it had stirred in him. If that girl stays one more day, Jack had thought. Now that she was gone, he couldn't quite remember why he hadn't asked her to. The sky had dried up fast, the way it always did out here. No apology, no warning. One minute it was rain, the next it was dust again. The storm gone, as if it had never happened. Jack stood near the broken fence line, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled past the elbow, sweat drying on his forearms. He'd been working since sunup, harder than necessary. The barn roof needed patching. His lower pasture needed checking. But none of those things had drawn him out here. Not really. He was avoiding the cabin. More specifically, the memory of Clara Bell standing in the doorway, bag in hand, smiling like she'd seen something in him worth remembering. He hadn't meant to look back after she left. He didn't believe in second thoughts. Second thoughts got men shot or married, sometimes both. But the house had felt different ever since. Still too quiet. Still too small. And the damn chair across from him at the table felt occupied, even when it wasn't. He swung the hammer harder than needed, splitting the head of the nail. Cursed under his breath and reached for another. He was mid-swing when he heard the hooves. Dust kicked up along the ridge trail, and a single rider approached. Big man. Thick in the shoulders. Moved like he knew how to throw weight without wasting energy. Eli Tucker. Jack dropped the hammer into the dirt. Hell. Eli reined in and dismounted without invitation. His horse looked glad to stop. "Fence took some damage," Jack said, jerking his chin at the brake. "Everything took damage," Eli said. "Storm nearly ripped the schoolhouse roof clean off. You all right out here?" Jack nodded. "You got company," Eli added casually. "Couple days back?" Jack didn't respond. Eli studied him a second. "Girl said her name's Clara Bell." Still nothing. "Guessin' you figured out what bell she belongs to?" At that, Jack's mouth flattened. He bent to pick up the hammer again, turned back to the fence. "She'll say where she was headed." "Double B," Jack replied. "She's kin to Rufus." Eli made a low noise. "Damn. That old bastard. I thought she looked too well fed for a local." Jack straightened slowly. "You come out here just to talk about bloodlines, Eli? The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice." Eli scratched his beard, shifted his weight. "I came out here 'cause people talking. Word spreading about a young lady spending the night at Jack Rowe's place during the storm." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Didn't do a damn thing, but offer shelter." "I didn't say you did, but others ain't so generous." Eli looked off toward the hills. Especially not her uncle. Jack's chest tightened. Eli continued, quieter now. "Rufus was in town yesterday. Loud enough for half the saloon to hear him say you're trouble. That you've always been?" Jack looked away. 6 years hadn't changed the story. "He ain't wrong," Jack muttered. "Yeah, he is," Eli snapped. "And you know it." Jack didn't answer. "You shot his foreman," Eli said, softer now. "That's true. But no one decent ever blamed you for it. Not when the man pulled first. Rufus holds that over your head like he's king of this territory. But he ain't T. He's just an old man with more land than sense." "I'm not looking to start trouble, Eli." Eli stepped forward, voice lower, firmer. "Jack, listen. She is a bell. And you know what happens when bells and rose mix? Blood and trouble?" Jack's mouth twitched at that. Not quite a smile. "Almost. Girl, don't act like a bell," he said, almost to himself. Eli raised an eyebrow. "You think she's different?" Jack shook his head. "I don't know what she is." "Well, you better figure it out," Eli said, turning back toward his horse. "Because Rufus Bells is the kind of man who don't let go of a grudge. And his niece. If she means anything to him, he'll use her to draw blood. Yours." Jack watched him ride off, dust curling behind the hooves like smoke from a slow fire. He spent the rest of the day in silence. Not working. Just thinking. That was worse. Sweat he could wash off. Thoughts clung. By evening, he found himself walking to the back of the cabin, where Clara had hung her wet dress over the fence too dry 2 days ago. It was gone, of course. But he could still see it in his head blue calico, soft in the rain. He walked back inside. The cabin hadn't changed. Still, just 4 walls, a bed, a stove, but it felt like something had shifted, even if it hadn't moved. He sat at the table, looked at the chair across from him. Again, he thought about her hands wet, but sure as they worked the skillet. The way she'd watched him without judgment. The way she'd stood there in a damn thunderstorm and smiled like it was a blessing. And then he thought about Rufus Bell. About the man's voice shouting over a saloon table. About the way that Foreman 6 years ago reached for his gun over a fence line dispute and left Jack staring down judgment ever since. Jack's fist closed slowly around the edge of the table. He didn't regret the shot. He regretted how long it had followed him. What would Clara do if she knew? What would she say if someone told her what he'd done? Would she still smile? Would she still choose to laugh at the rain? He stood up, paced once, then went to the door and stepped out into the night. The stars were out again, clear and sharp. A wind moved through the grass like a whisper with teeth. Somewhere out there, she was settling into her uncle's ranch. Big house, big rules. The kind of place that raised women who didn't spin in storms. And yet, she had spun. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it since. The next morning, he saddled his horse. Told himself he was headed to the creek pasture to check on a heifer that had gone missing in the rain. But by midday, he was near the edge of the Bell Lands. He didn't go further, just sat on his horse, staring at the fencing in the distance. Whitewashed. Clean. Too neat. He turned back before anyone saw him, but the fact he'd come at all settled into his gut like a stone, and that night, he had a dream he hadn't dreamed in years. Someone at the door. Not his father. Not the law. Just Clarabelle. Dripping rain and smiling like she'd always known her way there. She's a belle, Eli had warned. And you know what happens when bells and rose mix? Blood and trouble. But what if this time it was something else entirely? Jack didn't ride to the Bell Ranch again. Not that day, not the next. He told himself it was for the best. The line between past and present was already thin enough. He wasn't about to let his boots cross onto Rufus's Bell's land like it didn't matter. But something had cracked loose inside him, and it wasn't going back to where it was. He stayed busy. Fixed the fence, checked the stock, patched the barn roof before the next storm had a chance to find the soft spot. But the work didn't give him what it used. Too didn't quiet his head the same way. Every time he passed the corner of the cabin where Clara's laughter had echoed, or looked at the table where she'd set down that pan of eggs, the quiet felt louder. And when he finally made the ride into town, it wasn't because he needed supplies. It was because he needed the noise. People talking. Wagons creaking. The clang of Eli's hammer in the forge. Something to drown out whatever part of him was starting to miss a woman he barely knew. Main Street of Dry Creek was dust again, just like it had been before the rain. Windows open to catch the breeze. Laundry snapping behind houses. Dogs sleeping in the shade of the post office porch. The kind of day that looked calm if you didn't know how fast things could change. Jack tied off his horse and made straight for the general store. Inside, Miriam Holt stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, her long braid going gray at the edges. She didn't smile when she saw Jack Miriam. Wasn't the kind to greet a man with sugar if he hadn't earned it. But she gave him a nod. "Been a while," she said. Jack nodded. "Needed flour. You need flour like a rooster needs Sunday service." He didn't answer. Just pulled his hat off and ran a hand through his hair. Miriam tilted her head. "What's eating at you?" Jack hesitated. Then quieter. "You remember the girl from the wagon? Storm week? Heard she was Rufus Bell's kin." "She is." Miriam's hands didn't stop moving. She always kept working. Stocking shelves, folding cloth. But her eyes flicked to him sharp as a knife. "You get mixed up with that girl?" Jack shook his head. "Not like that. But you thought about it." He didn't answer. Miriam sighed. "Rufus came through here 2 days ago, mad as a kicked mule. Said he heard she spent the night at your place. Used words like improper, like he's got any right to throw stones." Jack's jaw tightened. Let him talk. He's not just tacking, Jack. He's stirring the pot. Wants folks to think you lured her in? That you're still that man from 6 years ago. Jack stared at the shelf of lantern oil like it might light something up inside him. "That man's dead," he said. "Don't matter if he is," Miriam said. "What matters is what folks believe. And Rufus is damn good at macking people believe." Jack let out a slow breath. "You believe him?" Miriam stopped folding. Looked at him full in the face. "I believe you'd rather die than hurt someone like her." He nodded once, then turned toward the door. But she called after him. "She came back to town, you know." He stopped. "Didn't he turn around?" Clara Miriam said, "Came in this morning. Said she needed fabric. Left in a hurry, like she was trying to get something done before someone could tell her not to." Jack didn't ask what kind of fabric. He didn't have to. He didn't mean to go by the dance hall. Not really. It just happened to be on his way to the farrier's shop. But there it was, the big wooden building on the edge of town. It's empty now, but in a few days it'd be full of fiddles and foot stomping and folks in their Sunday best. The annual harvest dance. A tradition going back longer than the town's post office. He hadn't been in that hall in years. Hadon T wanted to. But as he stood there, boots dusted, hat in hand, he could almost see her there already. Clara spinning in blue again, laughing like the roof was made of stars. He turned away fast. Too fast. But not fast enough to stop the thought from finishing. She's going to be there. The dance. The crowd, her, and probably Rufus too. Jack didn't know what he expected to happen. Maybe nothing. Maybe she'd smile at him and turn away, and he'd know he was just another man who happened to help on a rainy day. Maybe she'd pretend none of it mattered. Or maybe she'd look at him like she had in the cabin. Like she saw more than what people said. He walked back to his horse, boots dragging more than usual. That night, the rain didn't return, but Jack stayed awake anyway. Sat in the dark, staring at the chair across from his, one hand curled around a tin cup gone cold. He thought about what Eli had said. She's a belle. And you know what happens when bells and rose mix? Blood and trouble? Then he thought about Clara in the storm, arms raised like the sky belonged to her. About her eyes, moss green and sharp. About how she hadn't flinched when he'd told her the wheel was broken. She hadn't run from the hard truth. That meant something. He'd spent too many years punishing himself for surviving, for doing what needed doing. And now, when something good, maybe even someone good, stepped into his life, all he could do was stand still and pretend it didn't shake him. He stood from the table, walked outside barefoot, the night air cool on his skin. Above, stars blinked steady, clear and cold. There was a pair of boots he hadn't worn in a while, still tucked behind the trunk in his room. And a shirt that hadn't seen daylight since the year before the shot was fired. He didn't need to go to the dance. But he'd been alone long enough to know when not going would cost him more than showing up ever could. I ain't got a damn thing to offer her, Jack said into the darkness. But still, he shaved and ironed his only shirt. The town of Dry Creek never looked more alive than it did on the night of the harvest dance. Lanterns lined the street like fireflies on parade. The dance hall, usually nothing but old boards and dust, glowed warm with candlelight. Inside, fiddles sawed lively tunes while boots stomped out the beat. Long tables creaked under the weight of pies, beans, cornbread, and stew. Women wore dresses that shimmered when they moved. And even the roughest ranch hands had combed their hair and buttoned clean shirts for the occasion. Jack Rowe stood outside the entrance, stiff as fence post, the starched collar of his best shirt scratching against his neck. He hadn't worn it in years. The sleeves were a bit tight now. The boots on his feet had been polished until the scuffs faded to a dull shine. He felt like a fraud in his own skin. People passed him on their way inside, some nodding, most not. He was used to it. Being seen and avoided in equal measure. But tonight, the stares lingered a little longer. Maybe it was the shirt. Or maybe it was the look on his face. He almost turned back, almost mounted his horse and rode into the dark. And then she appeared. Clara Belle stepped out of the crowd like she'd been conjured by the music. Her dress was a deep shade of blue, darker than the one she wore in the rain, like twilight stitched into fabric. Her hair was pinned with tiny white flowers. She didn't scan the room, didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward him. "You came," she said, and her smile wasn't polite. It was pure gladness. Jack swallowed. "You didn't make it easy to stay away." Clara tilted her head, that same look of quiet challenge in her eyes. "I was in tea trying to—" They stood there a moment, the music spilling out behind them, people dancing and laughing and living. It felt like a world Jack hadn't belonged to in years. Clara offered her hand. "Well, Mr. Rowe, are we going to stand out here and miss all the good songs?" He looked at her hand like it might burn him. Then he took it. Inside, the light hit him full in the face, and for a second, the noise and color nearly sent him back out the door. But Clara held his hand firm and led him through the crowd like she knew exactly where he should be. The first dance was awkward. Jack's boots felt too heavy. His hands didn't know where to rest. His body moved like a man walking across ice. But Clara smiled through it all, guiding him gently, laughing whenever he hesitated, never once making him feel small. "You're thinking too much," she said as the fiddle picked up speed. "Feel the rhythm. Stop fighting it." Jack tried. And slowly, something loosened. By the third dance, they were in step. By the fourth, he found himself laughing under his breath. He didn't notice the whispers until the music paused. Didn't see the narrowing eyes or the turned heads until Clara froze beside him, her fingers tightening around his arm. Jack followed her gaze. Rufus Bell, standing near the food tables, arms crossed, face thundercloud dark. Two ranch hands flanked him like guards. His eyes locked on Jack with cold, deliberate disgust. Clara started to step forward, but Jack caught her arm. "I'll handle it." He walked toward Rufus with slow, measured steps, the room parting around him. When they were close enough to smell each other's breath, Jack stopped. "Evenin', Rufus." "Didn't expect to see you here, Ro?" Jack nodded once. "Didn't plan on it. Looks like you changed your mind. Or maybe someone else changed it for you." Jack held his voice steady. "Girl came through my land in the middle of a storm. Needed help. I gave it." Rufus snorted. "Is that what you call it?" Jack's jaw ticked. "I ain't gonna stand here and defend decency to a man who's never practiced it." A low murmur spread through the crowd. People were listening now. Watching. Rufus stepped closer. "Let me be real clear, boy. That girl is the only family I've got left. You keep your hands off her. She ain't property. She's a Bell, and I'm not afraid of that name." Rufus stared at him, face stone hard. "I know what you are, Ro. You're the same man who put a bullet in my foreman 6 years ago." Jack didn't flinch. He drew first. "And you were happy to finish it. You want me to apologize for surviving? I want you to stay the hell away from my kin." Clara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." She stepped between them, chin high, cheeks flushed with fury. "I'm not a bargaining chip, Uncle. And I am not a child. If you have a problem with who I talk to, maybe the problem's yours." Rufus turned on her. "You don't know this man?" "I know what kind of man helps a stranger in a storm, offers a dry roof and nothing more, and doesn't ask for anything in return." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I know he treated me with more respect than most ever have." Jack watched her with something like awe. She was into yelling. She was steady, fierce. Rufus took a step back. "We'll talk later." "No," Clara said. "We'll talk when I'm ready." She turned to Jack. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "I did." The music started again, awkwardly at first, like even the fiddle was trying to recover. Clara reached for Jack's hand. "One more?" she asked, but Jack stepped back. "I should go." Clara blinked. "Why?" He looked at her, really looked, and felt the weight come crashing back down. "Because he's right. What business do I have dancing and laughing with a woman like you?" Her smile faltered. "Jack." He was already moving. Outside, the air had cooled. Jack mounted his horse in silence, fury and shame burning deep. He rode hard, dust kicking behind him, until the lights of Dry Creek were a distant hum. He didn't stop until he reached his cabin. The chair across from his was empty, same as it had always been. He sat there, heart still racing, and didn't know what he hated more of Foosbell, or himself for letting that old man's poison get under his skin. "He'd rather fight ghosts than hold me," Clara whispered, her voice swallowed by the music and dust. The first snow came fast, heavy and wet, thicker than the usual dusting Texas might see. By mid-morning, the hills around Jack's ranch were white-capped, the wind sharp enough to slice clean through a coat. He was in the barn, spreading hay for the horses. He heard the sound of hooves cutting through snow, uneven and hard. He stepped into the open, the cold biting at his face. A rider was coming down the ridge trail, head low, coat flapping behind like a broken sail. The horse moved with effort, and the rider clung to the saddle like she hadn't rested in hours. Jack's gut twisted. It was Clara. He rushed forward, catching the reins before the mare could stumble. Clara slid off the saddle into his arms, trembling from the cold. Her cloak was soaked, her cheeks wind-chapped, and her lips were almost blue. "What the hell are you doing out in this?" he barked, voice harsh from worry. Clara tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to make sense. Jack didn't wait. He lifted her icily, carried her into the cabin, kicked the door shut with his heel. The stove still held warmth from earlier that morning, and he threw more wood on it before gently lowering her into the chair nearest the fire. "Jesus, Clara," he muttered, wrapping her in a thick quilt. "You trying to kill yourself?" "I needed to speak to you," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Jack poured hot coffee into a tin cup, wrapped her fingers around it. "You could have sent a letter?" "You've been avoiding town." "Avoiding me." He didn't argue, just moved around the room like he had too much to do and nowhere to hide. "I thought maybe I said something wrong," she added, staring into the fire. Jack stopped, turned toward her slowly. "You didn't." She looked up. "Then why?" He exhaled hard, like the air had weight. "Your uncle made his feelings clear. Figured it was easier on everyone if I stayed gone." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What did he say to you?" Jack hesitated. "Nothing that wasn't true." "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't hide behind vague words and long pauses. Tell me what he said." Jack ran a hand through his hair. The fire popped behind him, casting long shadows against the log walls. "He reminded me I'm not the kind of man who should be dancing with his niece. Reminded me I've got blood on my hands." Clara sat up straighter. "What blood?" He looked at her, then lowered himself into the opposite chair. The space between them felt both too far and not far enough. 6 years ago, one of his men is formed and accused me of letting cattle graze past the line. Things escalated. He pulled his gun. I pulled mine faster. Judge called it self-defense, but folks talk. Rufus never let it go. Clara didn't flinch. Didn't blink. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "No one ever asks," he said simply. "Most folks already got their version of the story, and the more you try to change it, the deeper it sticks." Clara set down her cup. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "That happened before we ever met. What matters to me is who you are now, and I think I know." Jack stood abruptly, started pacing. "Look around, Clara. This is what I have. This cabin. These animals. A past I don't talk about, and a name that makes people cross the street. I'm not asking for silk curtains and grand ballrooms," she said. "I'm asking for the man who watched over me during a storm and gave me his own bed without laying a hand on me." Jack stopped pacing. She stood, crossing to him slowly. Her voice softened. "I'm asking for the man who danced when he didn't know how, who stood up to my uncle even when it cost him something." His voice cracked. "Why would you want someone like me?" Her hand touched his cheek, fingers warm despite the cold. "I want the man who watches me like he's afraid I'll disappear, who listens even when he's trying not to. I've seen your smile, Jack Rowe. It's in your eyes. It's in your hands when you fix that fence, like it's the only thing holding the world together." Jack closed his eyes. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I've lived through enough to know the difference between kindness and performance, and I've never felt safer than I did in this cabin. With you." Silence settled between them, heavy and aching. Jack reached up, caught her hand in his. "I don't know how to do this," he said, rough. "I don't know how to be what someone else needs." Clara didn't move. "Then let me show you." She leaned in, and their lips met soft, tentative, a question waiting to be answered. Jack's arms wrapped around her slowly, then tighter, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. The kiss deepened, not urgent, but full, steady like the roots of something old and honest. When they pulled apart, neither said anything for a long moment. Outside, the wind howled. Snow piled deeper against the door. But in here, the fire was strong, the air warm, and for once Jack didn't feel the cold in his bones. That night, they talked until dawn. He told her about his father, how he died during a cattle run miles from home. About growing up alone, about the silence that followed him like a second shadow. She told him about her mother's songs, about the winter that took her parents one after the other, the deaths, the funerals, the silence of a city apartment packed up by strangers. "My mama used to say that rain was God crying," Clara whispered as they sat near the fire. "But I never believed that." Jack looked over. "No?" She shook her head. "Rain brings life. It softens the ground, makes things grow. That storm? It was a beginning, not a sorrow." He stared into the flames. "Is that why you laughed?" Clara nodded. "After months of drought, It felt like a miracle. And then there you were, this quiet, gruff cowboy looking at me like I'd lost my mind. Jack chuckled softly. Maybe I did. She leaned against his shoulder, voice drowsy now. I knew right then you were going to change my life. Jack looked down at her, resting against him like she'd always been there. I thought the same, he murmured, and I was scared as hell. Outside, the storm raged on for 2 more days, burying them in a silence that no longer felt lonely. Inside, they existed in a world apart, one built not on what they'd lost, but what they might build. I don't know how to love, Jack said, voice raw. Then I'll teach you, Clara replied, and kissed him like she meant it. They were married 2 weeks later in the lull between 2 storms. A traveling preacher made his way up from Amarillo, just in time to catch the last thaw before February locked the land down again. No church bells, no lace. Just Clara in her deep green dress and Jack in his cleanest shirt, standing on the worn floorboards of his cabin, saying vows with the wood stove crackling behind them and snow still melting in puddles near the door. Miriam Holt stood as witness, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of cedar and pipe smoke. Eli brought the preacher and stayed just long enough to shake Jack's hand and say, "Took you long enough." After they left, the world folded in, again just the 2 of them, and the long Texas winter ahead. Rufus Bell never showed. He didn't send a letter. Didn't he send word? Clara wrote once, told him she was married now, safe and happy. No reply came, but that didn't surprise her. What surprised her was how little it hurt. Jack took the silence harder. He didn't say it, but Clara could see it in the way he chopped wood like it owed him something. The way he went quiet when he heard a horse in the distance, and then looked away when it wasn't who he thought. She let him have the silence. Let him carry it. But she also filled the corners of their life with sound humming while she cooked. Reading aloud from books she found at the store, singing softly to herself when the wind got mean. The cabin changed, slowly. A curtain went up on the lone window. The bed gained another blanket one. She quilted herself with scraps of fabric from her mother's old dresses. Jack built a new shelf for her books. A table for her sewing. A peg near the door for her shawl. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Still, the winter fought them. Cattle died, even the strong ones. Feed ran low. The well froze twice. One afternoon, a patch of roof gave way under melting snow and soaked the floor clear to the hearth. Jack swore and patched it that night by lamplight, fingers red from cold. They fought back, together. Some mornings, Clara woke to find him already gone, leaving only a steaming cup of coffee and a fire burning strong. Other days she followed him to the barn, wrapped in layers, helping him break ice from the troughs, brushing down the horses, counting feed by hand. He never asked her to. She never waited for permission. Still, the weight wore on them both. Until one bitter morning in March, when Jack returned from a fence check, wind burned and bond tired, to find Clara kneeling on the floor near the hearth. He froze in the doorway. In front of her, on the little wooden crate they used as a side table, sat a half-dozen tiny purple flowers, wild crocuses, blooming, somehow alive. His eyes darted to the windows frosted, to the ground still hard with ice. He looked back to her. "How?" he asked, voice hushed. Clara smiled without standing. "I found the bulbs in your root cellar. They were dry, half dead. Thought maybe they'd come back with a little warmth." He crouched beside her, reaching out to touch one of the blossoms with rough fingertips. "They just needed care," she said in belief. Jack didn't speak for a long while. The fire popped beside them, soft and steady. When he finally looked at her, something inside him let go. Something that had been holding on too tight for too long, and he smiled, not a twitch, not a smirk. A real, wide, quiet smile that lit his whole face from somewhere deep and long buried. Clara's breath caught. "Jackro," she whispered, "you're beautiful when you smile." He shook his head, grinning now. "Don't get used to it." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder too late. Later, as the sky bruised into dusk, they stood on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the wind slow and the clouds lift. Birds returned to the branches. Water ran again in the creek. The world was shifting. Just a little. Sighed the flowers stayed near the fire, drinking in warmth. Jack pulled her closer, hand over the curve of her hip. I never thought it'd be like this. Like what? Like living was more than just surviving. Clara smiled. It's only the beginning. He nodded. Still watching the sky? You think he'll come around? He asked after a moment. She didn't need to ask who. Maybe she said. Maybe not. But we'll be all right either way. Jack wanted to believe that. He was learning how? They spent the next week fixing what the storm had broken. The roof, the barn door. Jack started cutting wood again with less anger in his swing. Clara dug her fingers into cold soil. Planning a garden, even when frost still threatened. They made a second room off the cabin, a small addition that leaked sawdust and stubbornness. Jack worked into the night on it. Said he needed the space for her sewing for storage. He never said the word baby. But Clara saw the way he lingered near the cradle she'd started carving from old pine. They didn't talk about it out loud yet, but they didn't need to. That spring, when the first true green returned to the hills and the river stopped biting. Word came down from town. Rufus Bell was riding out, with two of his ranch hands. Clara saw them first. Through the window, her hands stilled on the bread she was kneading. Jack stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowed. His fingers twitched toward his belt, then stopped. He didn't wear a gun anymore, not around her. Rufus dismounted stiffly. He looked older. Leaner. His face was weathered, but his pride hadn't softened a bit. They stared at each other for a long time before either spoke. Faint and unflinching. You make me want to every day. For the first time, Clara believed he truly meant it. Rufus Bell didn't say anything at first. He stood at the edge of Jack's porch, holding his hat in his hands like it was something he wasn't used to taking off. His eyes swept over the cabin. The new lumber on the side where the second room had gone up, the flower bed that Clara had coaxed from stubborn ground, the curtains fluttering behind the window glass. He took it all in like a man sizing up damage and, finding none he could justify. Jack stayed still, hands in his pockets. Clara watched from the doorway, silent but unafraid. You built this? Rufus asked, finally. Jack gave a single nod. Look steady. He managed, Jack said. Rufus grunted, then rubbed the back of his neck. Hard winter. Yep. Another beat of silence passed. Rufus glanced toward the empty pasture. Northfield won't hold much stock now. After what the snow did, Jack didn't rise to the bait. No, it won tea. Rufus shifted his weight. His voice came lower this time. I lost the army contract. Fever got into half my herd. Got too much grass and not enough hooves. Jack raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Thought maybe Rufus went on, you and I could work something out. Partnership of sorts. Behind Jack, Clara stepped onto the porch beside him. Her hand found his, and he laced his fingers with hers without. Looking, Jack's voice was calm. That offer got conditions? Rufus hesitated. Only one. Jack waited. Rufus looked at Clara. Not coldly this time. Not sharply. Just looked. The girl he'd tried to raise from. A distance. Always assuming she'd do as she was told. But she stood tall now, her belly just starting to show, and her eyes held no fear. You take care of her? He said. I do, Jack replied. Rufus nodded, cleared his throat. Good. Was a quiet moment. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but something cracked open. And the light got in? You'll stay for supper? Clara asked. Rufus blinked like he hadn't expected the invitation. Then slowly he nodded. Might be I could. That night 3 people sat at a wooden table built by hand, and scarred by years of use. They passed bread and stew and shared silences that didn't bite as hard as they used to. Rufus didn't say much, neither did Jack. But Clara talked enough for all of them. Telling stories about the new garden, the wild rabbit she'd chased off with a broom, the way Jack had tried to fix a broken window and ended up nailing his sleeve to the frame. Jack rolled his eyes. Rufus smirked once. It was enough. When the meal was done, and Rufus stood to leave, He paused at the door. "You've built something good here," he said, voice thick. "Took me a while to see it." Jack stood too, better late than never. They shook hands, rough palms, stubborn fingers, a handshake that meant more than any contract ever could. After he left, the moon rose high and round above the hills. Clara and Jack sat on the porch steps, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders, watching the stars blink on like lanterns in the sky. "Think he'll come around for the baby?" Jack asked. Quiet, Clara leaned against him. Maybe not." "But you did," Jack smiled, eyes soft. "You always see the best in people." "That's not true," she said. "I just don't run from it when it shows up."
He
Kissed the top of her head. "I still don't know how I got lucky enough to find you." Clara looked out at the land, the pasture where new shoots of green had started to show through winter's ruin. "I don't think it's luck," she said. "I think it's what happens when you stop surviving long enough to live." They sat there in the quiet, listening to the land breathe again. The months that followed, the ranch flourished. Jack took Rufus's deal, and together they rebuilt both herds. The fences were mended, the barn reinforced. The garden bloomed under Clara's hands, full of tomatoes, herbs, and the purple crocuses she refused to pull out, even when the heat made them wilt. Neighbors stopped by more often. Miriam came every Sunday with pie and sharp opinions. Eli showed up with spare nails and a tendency to talk too much. The silence Jack had wrapped himself in for years no longer had room to grow. And when autumn painted the hills in red and gold again, Clara sat him down on the porch and laid his hand gently on her belly. "Spring," she whispered. "Here she will be here by spring." Jack stared at her, then down at his hand, then up at the sky that had once felt too big to hold anything but loneliness. His smile came slow, honest, full. He pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "Looks like we've got more building to do." Years from now, folks would tell stories about Jack Rotha, cowboy who never smiled until he met a girl who laughed in the rain. They'd say he was hard but fair, quiet but kind. He raised a family in a house built from wood and forgiveness. That he never did learn to dance all that well. But he tried every time Clara asked. And every spring, when the rains came again, they'd step out onto the porch together, her hand in his eyes, turned to the sky, not to curse the storm, but to welcome it, because that was the kind of love they built strong enough to survive the droughts, but soft enough to bloom when the rain finally came. "You see the best in everything," Jack whispered, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Even in me, when I couldn't see it myself."